Hyderabad. First, I would request Director, Arms Control and Disarmament Center, Malik Qasim Mustafa, for his introductory remarks. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Amna. Now, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Esteemed speakers, especially our guest from Geneva, Mr. Usman Noor, Government Relation Manager, Campaign to Stop Killer Reports Geneva, and Ms. Nada Tarbush, Consular, UN Mission of State of Palestine in Geneva, distinguished Pakistani experts, Major General Asaf Ali, Advisor SPD, Mr. Ahmed Bilal Sufi, Senior Lawyer and Pakistan's former Federal Law Minister, Mr. Ahsan Nabil from Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Mr. Raza Shah, Chief Executive, SPEDO, and spokesperson for Campaign to Stop Killer Reports. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Institute of Strategic Studies and Arms Control and Disarmament Center, I welcome you all to today's event, which is organized in collaboration with Sustainable Peace and Development Organization, SPEDO. Ladies and gentlemen, since the establishment of the ACDC in 2019, it has organized numerous events to discuss and debate emerging technologies, including artificial intelligence, big data, cybersecurity, and other areas. And we try to find their role to provide us with endless opportunity to transform our future. However, we would not forget that most of these emerging technologies also have a dual use potential. They are transforming the future of warfare. For example, the development of lethal autonomous weapon systems, or commonly known as killer robots, which is a special class of AI-based weapon systems that engage and destroy targets without human control. Major powers like the US, China, Israel, South Korea, Russia, and UK are developing these autonomous systems. Ladies and gentlemen, this increasing weaponization of AI is generating insecurity and fear and present complex security challenges for state. The development of these weapons has raised fundamental questions on their regulation, autonomy, accountability, and state responsibility, and their likely impact on human protection instruments like international human rights and humanitarian law. The 11 guiding principles adopted by the group of governmental experts, GGE, of the Convention on Certain Chemical Conventional Weapons, CCW, in 2019 focused on the application of international law and international humanitarian law on such weapons, and emphasized that it is the state's responsibility to ensure physical security and non-physical safeguards, make risk assessments and mitigation measures, and distinguish between military necessity and humanitarian considerations. Ladies and gentlemen, Pakistan is among the first countries that considered that such weapons raises complex moral, ethical, and legal dimensions, and fundamentally change the nature of war, which raises the potential for an accountability gap. Recently, on March 6, 2023, Pakistan submitted a proposal for an international legal instrument on laws within the CCW discussion. Our panelists will explain about these working paper and these proposals. However, our neighbor is not only investing in the development of these various autonomous weapon systems, but it has also demonstrated such weapons as part of its preparation for a non-contact warfare. Dear participants, with this premise, the Arms Control and Disarmament Center, in collaboration with SPEDO, has organized this seminar to explore the current status of the global movement to ban killer robots, challenges to international security, and a regional perspective on developing a legal instrument to prohibit and regulate laws. For that, we have brought together well-known national and international experts and have requested them to explore these areas. Thank you. And with this, I hand over back to Amna.
Thank you so much. I would now request Director General ISSI, Ambassador Suhail Mahmood, for his welcome remarks. Ambassador Suhail Mahmood is serving as the Director General of the Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad. Ambassador has been a career Foreign Service officer with diplomatic experience spanning 37 years that included various assignments at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as well as Pakistan's missions abroad in both bilateral and multilateral arenas. He joined the Foreign Service of Pakistan in 1985. From April 2019 to September 2022, Ambassador Suhail Mahmood served as the 30th Foreign Secretary of Pakistan. Prior to his appointment as the Foreign Secretary, he served as Pakistan's High Commissioner to India. Earlier, he had served as Pakistan's ambassador to Turkey, Thailand, and permanent representative to the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and Pacific, Bangkok. Ambassador Suhail Mahmood holds a master's degree in international affairs from the Columbia University, New York, as well as a master's in history from Quaid-e-Azam University, Islamabad. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Amna. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning. Let me begin by extending a warm welcome to Mr. Usman Noor, Government Relations Manager, Campaign to Stop Killer Robots, Geneva, and his spouse, Ms. Nada Tarbush, Counselor at the UN Mission of the State of Palestine in Geneva, on their visit to Pakistan and for their participation in this seminar. We also deeply appreciate participation of the other distinguished panelists, Major General Osaf Ali, Mr. Ahmer Bilal Sufi, former Minister of Law, Justice, Parliamentary Affairs, and Human Rights of Pakistan, joining us online, and Mr. Ahsan Nabil, Director ACDIS at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We are grateful to the Permanent Mission of Pakistan to the United Nations and other international organizations in Geneva, as well as the Arms Control and Disarmament Division of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for their support. Last but not the least, our special thanks to the Sustainable Peace and Development Organization, SPEDO, for their active collaboration with ISSI in organizing this seminar. In all, we have a group of distinguished diplomats, servicemen, academics, area study experts, practitioners, and above all, students from various universities for this event. I extend a very warm welcome to all of them. Distinguished participants, the transformative potential of new and emerging technologies like robotics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning is affecting every facet of human civilization. There are hundreds and thousands of applications of these technologies. Unmanned vehicles are in military use since the First World War. However, their excessive use by the US during its post 9/11 global war on terror brought them into global limelight. However, we have seen a remarkable increase in dialogues and discussions on this subject only in the last 5 to 6 years. Why is it so? In our view, there are a few trends that have been instrumental in causing this shift. First, the post 9/11 systems were largely state-owned and always kept humans in the loop. In the past few years, research and development in the field of laws have reached a critical stage in terms of increasing lethality and decreasing human control, which requires an in-depth reflection on these related issues like the level of autonomy, human-machine interactions, accountability, proportionality, right of self-defense, conflict escalation, and effects on strategic stability. It is entirely appropriate, therefore, to raise the question whether a decision over the survival of human lives and the future of this planet be left to a machine while keeping humans out of the loop. Second, during the immediate post 9/11 era, the United States dominated the research and development of these technologies. But now it is facing a stiff competition from other major powers. Even more notably, multiple studies indicate that these technologies have now spread to more than 100 countries. This is a massive increase within a short span, as only 60 countries possessed such technologies a decade ago. Hence, the proliferation of these technologies has raised the profile of the phenomenon and is impelling a deeper reflection on it. Third, the dual use nature has led to massive commercial manufacturing of such technologies and their rapid proliferation in the civil sector. This has generated serious and legitimate concerns that non-state actors could easily get and customize these technologies and systems for their malicious purposes. These concerns can be ignored by the international community only at its own peril. Since 2014, the state parties to the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, CCW, have discussed how to address the threat of killer robots. Their deliberations have focused on building common understanding of the meaning of human control and the risks associated with autonomous weapons. In May 2013, Pakistan became the first country to call for a ban on fully autonomous weapons. It has repeatedly advocated for the creation of a new international ban instrument on such weapons. Pakistan has expressed multiple concerns vis-à-vis these weapons, finding that they will violate international humanitarian and human rights law, as well as lower the threshold for war and create security risks. Pakistan has actively participated in and constructively contributed to the deliberations in all the meetings of the CCW on lethal autonomous weapon systems from 2014 to 2023. Earlier this year, Pakistan submitted a detailed working paper titled, and I quote, Proposal for an International Legal Instrument on Lethal Autonomous Weapons Systems Laws, unquote, within the CCW discussions, containing details for both prohibitions and regulations in the form of an international legally binding instrument. Hopefully, the working paper will help generate focused discussions and lead the way towards a desirable outcome. With this brief background, I once again welcome all the participants and guests. We look forward to hearing expert perspectives on multiple dimensions of the issues relating to laws and their ideas as to how the world should tackle this new emerging threat. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. I would now request Mr. Raza Shah Khan, Chief Executive SPEDO and spokesperson for the campaign to stop killer robots, to give us a short overview of the global movement to ban killer robots. You have the floor, Mr. Shah.
Thank you so much, respectable Ambassador Khalid Mahmood, Chairman, Board of Governors, ISSI, Honorable Ambassador Suhail Mahmood, DG ISSI, Qasim Mustafa Saab, distinguished speakers, Mr. Ahmed Bilal Sofi, Major General Osaf Ali, Usman Noor, Nada Tarbosh, Hassan Nabil from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, distinguished guests, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. I will quickly go through the movement which I also represent, and it will be a very brief presentation about what we have achieved so far. But first of all, I would like to pay my gratitude to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Institute of Strategic Studies for concurring with our proposal to host this joint seminar on such an important issue. The campaign to stop killer robots has been working on the issue of autonomous weapon systems for more than a decade. And during this period, we have generated extensive knowledge, awareness, and support for a legally binding instrument on autonomous weapons. But keeping in view the limited time available, I will quickly take you to the journey so far. So you could see on the screen that the campaign to stop killer robots is a very diverse campaign. We have members from almost all over the world. You can see some of the world leading organizations like the Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch. Then we have Mine Action Canada, the PEX, the Women League for Peace and Freedom. And then there are like one huge campaign, SEHLEC, which is based in South America. So these are some of the members of the steering committee of the campaign to stop killer robots. So you can understand that it's a very diverse campaign, and our only focus is to ban killer robots and to have a legally binding instrument on laws. The campaign was formed in October 2012. As I have already mentioned, that it's a coalition of non-governmental organizations calling for a legally binding instruments that include both prohibitions and regulations. The campaign is engaged both at the national, regional, and global levels. We have been very active in demonstrating in front of the United Nations in New York and in Geneva. We have been carrying out various public awareness campaigns in the United States, in Germany, almost all of the Europe. Recently, the campaign also hosted a quite large conference in Costa Rica. So if you see, the campaign has been working through its member organizations all over the world with a mandate, and that has already been clear that we need legal prohibitions on the use of autonomous weapon systems. Apart from like creating and promoting awareness at the regional and global levels, we have been very active at the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons. Those who are not aware of the CCW, it is one of the largest disarmament conventions which takes place at the United Nations in Geneva. So the campaign to stop killer robots has been regularly delivering its statements, and we have bilateral meetings with many states. As Usman Noor is also here, he will talk about more that what we have been doing at the CCW. But we have been regularly attending the meeting of the group of governmental experts at the CCW. We have been holding side events. So this is one of the activities which have been carrying out for the last almost 10 years. Apart from that, if we look at our website, there are a variety of papers available, like we have been conducting research. Even our member organization, the Human Rights Watch, the International Committee on Robotics Arms Control, they have been publishing a variety of papers. So I would strongly suggest to those who are interested to learn more about the issue to visit the website of the campaign to stop killer robots, where you will find a variety of research papers. We have also recently launched a video which is called Immoral Code. So that is also something worth to see. So we have toolkits, we have videos, and there are a variety of research papers available on the website. Just to give you a very quick brief of the CCW, as I have already mentioned that it is one of the largest disarmament forum at Geneva. So in 2014, the first informal meeting of experts was held, and a further 2 informal meetings of experts were held in 2015 and 2016. In 2016, the 5th CCW review conference was presided over by Ambassador Tehmina Janjua of Pakistan. High contracting parties decided to establish a group of governmental experts, which we call the GGE, on laws to meet for the first time in 2017 with a mandate to assess questions related to emerging technologies in the area of lethal autonomous weapon systems. At the recommendation of the 2019 GGE on laws, 11 guiding principles were adopted by the 2019 meeting of the high contracting parties in the CCW. And since then, it is a chronology of the meetings that have already been taken place at the United Nations in Geneva. I will not go through these meetings in detail, but you could see that since 2017, almost 2 meetings every year have been held. There were a bit of a kind of delays during the time of the COVID pandemics. But again, we were able to reconvene, and you could see that almost 13 to 14 meetings have already been held at the CCW in Geneva. And the last GGE meeting will be held from 15 to 19 May 2023 this year. So this will be the last meeting of the GGE this year. So a lot of awareness has been generated. We have been able to develop consensus. But unfortunately, since CCW, as many of you would be aware, is a consensus-driven approach. So despite the fact that majority of the states, almost, I will show that to you, almost 90% of the states are in favor of a legally binding instrument. But there are few states which I would mention even here, like the United States, Russia, Israel, up to some limit, the United Kingdom, and then especially India. They were trying to block the process. And in many occasions, they have almost abused the consensus-driven approach towards a legally binding instrument. But we have been able to get support of almost 90 states, and even the non-aligned movement, which is a coalition of 120 countries, are also in favor of a legally binding instrument. The campaign to stop killer report has been very active, as I have mentioned, in the CCW, and the call for a ban is getting more stronger. I will quickly go through some of the highlights that the International Committee of the Red Cross is in favor of a legally binding instrument. 21 Nobel Peace Laureates, they have delivered statements, and they are also asking to ban killer robots. Then 180 plus, now it's even more than 200 organizations are also asking for a ban on killer robots. 25,000 artificial intelligence experts, they are in favor of a legally binding instrument. The EU Parliament has also passed a resolution in favor of a legally binding instrument. We also conducted a public perception survey, I think 2 years ago. I believe that this percentage would now have been significantly improved, but that was a public perception survey in which 61% of the public said that we need a legally binding treaty or a legally binding instrument in favor of to ban lethal autonomous weapon systems. And then 90 countries are calling for a legally binding instruments. Non-aligned movement, as I have already mentioned, has already delivered various statements in favor of a legally binding instrument. And then the United Nations Secretary General has also called for a ban. And I would like to tell you that what the Secretary General has said, and I will quote that I call on states to ban these weapons that are politically unacceptable and morally revolting. So just to see on what we have achieved so far, we have a huge majority of states which are supporting our call towards a legally binding instrument, and we have the support of the Secretary General of the United Nations, which we believe that although we have faced a lot of challenges and problems during the CCW, but we have also a very strong support of states, and we have also a support of the United Nations systems. And then for the first time, since these were the discussions which were mostly taking place at the CCW in Geneva, but since the CCW forum is more like a consensus-driven approach, and it was also very frustrating, so for the first time at the United Nations General Assembly in September last year, states across the world get united in delivering a joint statement on autonomous weapon system. And then a total 70 states joining. This was the largest cross-regional group statement ever made throughout the UN discussion on the issue of laws. And it concluded that recognition that autonomous weapon systems raise serious concerns from humanitarian, legal, security, technological, and ethical perspectives, acknowledgement of the need to maintain human responsibility and accountability in the use of force. And finally, they emphasized on the need for internationally agreed rules and limits, including a combination of prohibitions and regulations on autonomous weapon systems. In Pakistan, we have been carrying out various activities. In collaboration with the Campaign to Stop Killer Robots, has held a series of seminars before holding this event. We have also carried out a poster competition to create and promote awareness, and some of the posters you can see here in the hall. We have also carried out a petitions campaign. Then in 2019, we hosted a regional civil society meeting in which we invited civil society organizations from Sri Lanka, from Nepal, from Central Asia, and even some campaigners came from Japan. And then we also launched a campaign and we actually linked the campaign with the pandemic. So the name of the campaign was Stop the Future Pandemic of Killer Robots. So this is a series of activities, and today's seminar is also the series of what we have been doing in the past. You could see a bit of the glimpses of our previous activities, including our regional meeting that was held in 2019. During that civil society meeting, a civil society declaration was adopted, and the participants affirmed the urgent need for states from Asia to immediately begin work to negotiate a new treaty to prohibit development, production, transfer, and use of autonomous weapons. They acknowledge the need for further actions to address this issue at regional, national, and international levels. Inter alia, increase national outreach to encourage political support for the goal of banning killer robots, build and leverage a broad regional coalition that includes civil society groups, as well as academics, religious leaders, robotists, and scientists, youth, and other experts, and build their capacity to campaign on the issue. And they also agreed to work together to promote peace and stability within the region and to foster greater regional cooperation by and between Asian states towards the goal of launching negotiations for a new legally binding instrument. So these were some of the activities which we have been carried out in Pakistan and at the global level. The campaign highly appreciates the leading role of Pakistan, which is championing the negotiations inside the CCW at the UN in Geneva. We also understand the regional security concerns of Pakistan, as unfortunately, India has, with the passage of time, deviated its position from the non-aligned movement countries. But we believe that Pakistan will continue to play a leadership role at the regional and global levels. As we can see that Sri Lanka has been like a champion of peace in the region. So in partnership with like-minded countries like Nepal, Sri Lanka, and even countries from the South Asia, Pakistan could continue to play a leadership role at the regional and global levels, contributing to developing a regional consensus among states in favor of a legally binding treaty. So I once again extend my thanks to the ISSI, and we look forward to future collaborations and sharing of knowledge and information related to the issue of laws. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Raza, for your comprehensive overview. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now play a special video message from Ambassador Khalil Hashmi, Permanent Representative of Pakistan to the United Nations and other international organizations in Geneva. Prior to his appointment as the Permanent Representative of Pakistan, Ambassador Hashmi served as the Director General of United Nations at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Ambassador Hashmi has previously held portfolios of Director General of European Region, Director General Arms Control, and Director for Disarmament Affairs, India and South Asian Region. Ambassador Hashmi's diplomatic career includes posting at Pakistan's embassies in Copenhagen, Beijing, Pakistan's mission to United Nations in New York. Ambassador Hashmi joined the Foreign Services of Pakistan in 1994 and has worked on a range of policy issues related to arms control, counterterrorism, human rights, and climate change, among others.
Director General Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad, distinguished guests, I'm pleased to be speaking at this seminar on a very topical subject. On behalf of Pakistan Mission in Geneva, I would like to thank Ambassador Suhail Mahmood, as well as the Sustainable Peace and Development Organization, for taking the initiative to organize today's event. We very much hope that today's seminar would contribute to the ongoing efforts by the government as well as the think tank community in Pakistan to mainstream discussions on this important area. The Pakistan UN mission in Geneva has also been facilitating such efforts, including through organization of a 2-day joint workshop by UNIDIR and the Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad, last year on the larger issue of new and emerging technologies. We look forward to building on that theme through another event later this year. distinguished guests, the subject of lethal autonomous weapon systems, or in other words, laws, has gained increasing international salience and attention over the last decade. These are weapon systems that, once activated, are able to identify, track, engage, and apply force to targets without human control or intervention. Since 2014, the conversation on this subject has been taking place within the framework of Convention of Certain Conventional Weapons, the CCW, earlier in the informal group of experts from 2014 to 2016, and since 2016 in the group of governmental experts, in other words called the GGEs. Broadly, just by way of background, the states remain divided in two categories: those who support an international legal instrument containing certain prohibitions and regulations, and then there are those who oppose a legally binding approach. The deliberations on this subject can broadly be classified into four main themes: humanitarian, legal, ethical, and security dimensions. I'm sure you will hear more from the experts on these four aspects. I'd just like to take the opportunity to mention the aspect of security. Weapons of any kind do not exist in isolation. Their production is intrinsically linked both to their deployment and use. And laws are no exception despite their unique characteristics. These weapon systems will have significant consequences for security at global, regional, and sub-regional levels, including in terms of lowering the threshold
Okay. Before I invite our honorable speakers, I would request them to please complete their remarks within the allocated time so we could have more time for question and answer sessions. Our first speaker for today's event is Mr. Ahmed Bilal Sufi. Mr. Sufi is an advocate, Supreme Court of Pakistan. He served as the Federal Minister for Law, Justice and Parliamentary Affairs and Human Rights during caretaker setup in 2013. He is also the founding president of the Research Society of International Law. Mr. Sufi is a member of panel of eminent persons of OIC. Mr. Sufi has represented Pakistan before international courts, US district courts and UK commercial courts, and has advised in case under the War Crimes Tribunal. Mr. Sufi is the author of over 100 articles and comments printed in leading newspapers and journals in Pakistan. Mr. Sufi is invited frequently to lecture on various aspects of international law issues related to Pakistan at the National Defense College, Islamabad, Command and Staff College, Quetta, National Management College, Lahore, Naval War College, Lahore, and several other institutes. He graduated from Government College, Lahore, did his law graduation from the University of Punjab, and later LLM from the University of Cambridge, UK. Mr. Sufi, you have the floor now.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. First of all, let me thank ISSI, Ambassador Khalid Mahmood, Ambassador Suhail Mahmood for organizing this. And I would also like to recognize Mr. Raza Shah Khan's effort over the last so many years on this subject when it was less emphasized. And he used to invite people like me and deliberate on the sensitivity and the seriousness that was associated with this issue. And that's where, when we looked at it several years ago, we were able to identify some very, very serious legal issues associated with the development of the automated weapons and the programs and the algorithms that were behind that. I would just quickly flag them in a point form for the audience. First, the issue of state responsibility under international law. The automated weapons are produced, obviously, in a territory of a state, but produced sometimes by a private entrepreneur, by a private business entity, or it could be done by a governmental entity, production entity, such as POF, for example, that we have in Pakistan. The question is, in case of private production of these programs, algorithms, and details, where will the state responsibility lie in the event these weapons result in injury, death, or cause destruction of any property outside the territory of that country? Second is the issue relating to a fixing of individual responsibility on the civil side and on the criminal side. On the civil side, again, there could be an automated weapon-based mischief or a destruction of any individual, his safety, his property. Then what will be the nature of civil responsibility and who should be held responsible for that? Likewise, if there is an offense being committed pursuant to the use of automated weapon, then the responsibility again, should it be vested with to a programmer, to the manufacturer, to the license holder, to the company which has manufactured that, to the state which has given the license for the use of that, or where? So again, it remains an open-ended legal challenge to affix both the civil responsibility and also the criminal responsibility as and when a lethal automated weapons is put into any kind of use. The other legal point I wish to flag is the when would a lethal weapons use or its initiation, if it is done through a sanction by the government of any state, will be viewed as an attack under Article 2 of the UN Charter, or it will entitle the state under Article 51 to make a counter move, because Article 51 says the right of self-defense is there when an armed attack occurs. Now, the armed attack in a traditional sense basically meant that you could see the infantry of an opposing enemy state drawing near to you. And then there was an interpretation by international lawyers over a period of time in 50s, 60s, and 70s, in which they said, in the event that there's a preparation being made for an armed attack, so we will have assumed a right to strike in advance, in self-defense, in anticipation. And therefore, that strike, although the attack has not yet occurred, but the preparatory steps of those attacks have commenced. So we will assume that to be an attack. And a classical example was the Egyptian Air Force aircrafts, when they were all set to take off in 1960 war against Israel. Israel attacked, carried out a strike and destroyed them. And it was viewed that this was a sufficient legal circumstance to justify a counter move from a state. Similarly, in case of missiles, for example, once they are moved out of their silos, you can make a judgment call. There is a likely threat to sovereignty of the state, and therefore a right to reply has accrued, and you can commence countermeasures. But in case of automated weapons, this still remains a gray area. When exactly would a state construe that a threat is arising to a level where it justifies countermeasures in terms of self-defense, in terms of Article 51, when the weapons are being licensed for manufacturing, when the mischief inherent in the automated weapon becomes known, when it is being manufactured by a state which is an enemy state and it has a history of certain threats, or when it is being manufactured or put to a potential use by giving it through a licensing measure, when? Again, that's an open-ended question, and that is a serious legal question to look at. The other point I wish to make is the concept of, again, the enemy state versus a friendly state. We have these concepts inherent in our law, in our Civil Procedure Code, in our Citizenship Act, and several other acts. The certain states are to be categorized as enemy states, some states are friendly states. So manufacturing of a lethal weapon in a friendly state may not be viewed as a threat, but a manufacturing of the same weapon in a state which is otherwise categorized as enemy state could be taken as a threat. So what will then be the options of the state which perceives that to be a threat? Should there be an adjudicating mechanism established through an international treaty framework or not? And of course, then there's another point relating to that they outrightly violate the law of war, which they do. And I think there's a lot of literature on that already, so I leave that point at this. The issue remains is that what happens when, in terms of public international law, the nature of violation is such that once an automated weapon has taken assumed control under its program, under its algorithm, Now it is irreversible. So traditional international humanitarian law would make a judgment call that you have a commander on the field, and he is now aiming at someone who is an enemy combatant. Enemy combatant drops the weapon. Now he's no longer a military target. So while you're aiming at him, you make a choice on a battlefield as a commander that he should not now further shoot him. So that kind of decision making is not inherent in a weapon which is automatically programmed to just go and kill, no matter if the person is causing an immediate threat or not. So the battlefield decision making of the commander stands compromised, and that space, which is so crucial for the implementation of the IHL principles and decision making, stands virtually vanished. The other point I wish to flag is that where should I strongly support, obviously, as an academic and as a person interested in international law, that there should be a comprehensive framework for banning these nuclear weapons, for banning these automated weapons, or regulating them in a very comprehensive manner through a licensing regime, through mutual exchange of information about the status of where the technology has arrived, so that the threat is not misread. And that is so significant at a bilateral and multilateral level. And that cannot be achieved unless there is a treaty. And we had talked about this treaty several years ago in the seminars which were conducted by Reza Hansa. Now, there could be something that could be drawn if a treaty structure could come into place. Alternatively, till that doesn't happen because it takes time, you have an Article 36 additional protocol mechanism of review of an ongoing weapons. So if there is a weapon system which is coming up afresh, which is coming up new, which is matching the technology standards and challenges, Article 36 of the additional protocol to Geneva Convention creates an obligation that such weapon systems should undergo a comprehensive review process in order to ascertain if its use will be in violation of IHL principles, which have been laid down, for example, by the International Court of Justice in nuclear weapons case in 1996 legal advisory opinion, where they actually said this, that all kinds of weapons that have an indiscriminate use or who are uncontrollable, they need to be properly monitored and regulatory framework needs to be attached. Coming back to the venue, one venue obviously is where in Geneva, our very capable ambassador is making efforts to have this legal framework proposal pushed, and a lot of countries are kind of agreeing with it. If I hear it correctly, over 90 countries believe that such a multilateral framework should come into existence. May I also recommend to this August gathering that another venue which could be explored is the Sixth Committee of the UN General Assembly, which has the mandate for legal documentation, for preparatory documentation, for legal conventions and international law conventions. And several conventions have been initiated by the Sixth Committee of the UN General Assembly in New York. So I believe that can also be explored. Another option that I think needs to be explored is to volunteer a draft by a think tank or by a committee of experts to the international community for them to look at the text and to ascertain, have something to munch on, as we say, something to discuss, deliberate, disagree, amend, bring better formulations, but something on right now we have a thematic. So for that, there are international law reputed think tanks like UNIDRAW in Rome, International Institute for Unification of Private Law, which volunteers international conventions, which are then placed by the UN General Assembly to this Conference of State Parties because of the expertise that is required. It's not going to be a political convention or a political multilateral instrument. It will be an extremely technical instrument which will need to involve public international law issues and private international law issues. So it will need to regulate private manufacturers, licensors, licensees, programmers, their regulatory framework within the state, and at the same time come to a determination at a public international law state to state. So in other words, if I could use the contemporary jargon, there has to be G to G obligation framework and B to B obligation framework, business to business, and G to B and G to B obligation framework. And that framework has to come up by a group of experts who are familiar with the both frameworks of public international law and private international law. For that, for me, which comes to my mind is UNIDRAW, and it is named as International Institute for Unification of Private Law, which takes upon itself such challenging drafting exercise as experts from private and public international law, and together they raise a draft, and then the draft could be positioned. So member of state parties, those who are members of the governor, there's a board of governors of UNIDROIT, and I believe those countries out of 90, those of which are parties are sitting on the board, they can direct and commission this kind of a study from UNIDROIT itself. Finally, I would also like to suggest that there should be a coherent and a very in-depth study that should be carried out of the evolving customary norm against automated weapons, against artificial intelligence to be put to military use. We clearly have now alerts coming out from experts who have programmed artificial intelligence programs, and they are they're very nervous. And we saw one of the experts is stepping out and resigning from his assignment and alerting the world. It's just like Alfred Nobel telling us there's something big coming to hit us. So and then he started the Nobel Peace Prize. So I think we need to also give a proper pushback in terms of what needs to be done. And for that, the number of states which are standing with the idea of the multilateral instruments is a very interesting development. It is perhaps in a matter of few years, 3 or 4 or 5 years, that we see a customary norm evolving. So a study needs to be undertaken on that. I'll stop here, and if there are further questions, we can take them up. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sufi. Our second speaker for today's event is Ms. Nada Tarbush. Ms. Tarbush is counselor at the Permanent Observer Mission of the State of Palestine to the United Nations and other international organizations in Geneva. During her work in multilateral diplomacy in Geneva and previously in New York, she has covered a range of disciplines, including disarmament, human rights, and humanitarian affairs. Prior to her work in diplomacy, she acquired experience at the World Bank, UNDP, and UN Women. She holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Philosophy, Politics, and Economics from the University of Oxford's Master's degree in International Affairs from Columbia University, and an Executive Master's in International Law and Armed Conflict from the Geneva Academy of International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights. I would now request Ms. Tarbush to take the floor for her remarks on State of Palestine's position on laws. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum, and a very good morning to everyone. I'm honored to be here with you all and in this beautiful country of Pakistan. I would like to start by thanking the ISSI and SPADO for organizing this important seminar, and also congratulating Pakistan for the leadership role it has taken on autonomous weapon systems. Pakistan is truly one of the most active, progressive, creative actors in the discussion, and has very much shaped the international debate and inspired Palestine's own position on this issue.
Your camera off now. Mic off.
Oh, can everyone hear me? Oh, okay. In the last GGE, in the last meeting on these weapons in Geneva, like Pakistan, the State of Palestine submitted a working paper containing a detailed proposal for the normative and operational framework on autonomous weapon systems, and a copy of this paper is in your folders for reference. In my presentation today, I will start by walking you through the State of Palestine's position as reflected in this paper, and then briefly speak about the Palestinian context and the regional dimension that has also prompted us to take an active role in the effort to internationally prohibit and regulate these weapon systems. So let me start with what we mean by autonomous weapon systems. I started working on this issue about 1.5 years ago, and as a newcomer, I was very confused by all of these technical terms. So I'm going to try to break it down if there are any newcomers in the room. So an autonomous weapon system, you can think of it as a system where the human activates the system, and then the rest of the process happens autonomously. So what this means is you activate the system, then the system has sensors which capture data from the external environment. This data is then processed by the system, and then the processed data is used to to see if it matches a target profile, which is pre-programmed. So you have a pre-programmed target profile in the weapon system. If the process data matches the target profile, the weapon selects the target and then engages it with force. So this is what you can call the autonomous process. This process can be incorporated into a broad range of weapon systems. For example, the types of sensors used can be different. You can have acoustic sensors, thermal, seismic, optical sensors. The methods of data processing can be different. You can have machine learning processes or simple calculations, complex algorithms, and other processes. The nature of the target profile selected can be different. For example, the target profile that's pre-programmed can be of a human being, or it can be of a tank or of another object. And the scope of the force applied can be different. So all of these are variable, but no matter what these variations are, if a system has this autonomous process, then it is considered an autonomous weapon system. Now, I'd like to talk about what we believe as Palestine should be prohibited in terms of these systems. So for us, two categories of autonomous weapon systems should be prohibited. The first one is autonomous weapon systems that are designed or used to target human beings directly. And the second is autonomous weapon systems that cannot be used with meaningful human control. So I'm going to explain these. So first of all, on targeting humans, why should we ban systems that target humans directly? There are ethical reasons and there are legal reasons, and I'll start by talking about the ethical reasons. So from an ethical perspective, in order for you to program a target profile of a human being in a system, what you need to do as a designer is to reduce a human being into data. So basically, for example, if they want to create a target profile of me, they would have to, they would have to translate me, Nada, into zeros and ones. They would have to make me into a code, which is then programmed into the system. So a human being with their background, with their emotions, their soul, their human dignity, all of this is just reduced to zeros and ones. And this is very problematic from an ethical perspective because it is dehumanizing. And so you have many polls and surveys showing that the general population, the general public, feel that it would be crossing a moral red line to start reducing human beings to just data points. From a legal perspective, autonomous weapon systems designed or used to target humans directly also pose various challenges to international humanitarian law. And Ambassador Bilal Soufi already mentioned some of these. For example, in combat situations, fighting is fluid and dynamic. So for example, a combatant can be a combatant one moment and a civilian the next moment if the combatant surrenders, for example. And a civilian can be a civilian one moment and a combatant the next moment if he decides or she decides to take up arms and participate in hostilities. So you can't, the legal qualification as a military objective can change. And it seems very challenging to identify metrics that would allow a system to reliably distinguish between people who are civilians, civilians directly participating in hostilities, military active combatants, or combatants hors de combat. So it would be very, very challenging for an autonomous weapon system to be able to make correct decisions if it is targeting humans. And it's very likely that it can make mistakes and target illegitimate targets. Then the other prohibition is for autonomous weapon systems that cannot be used with meaningful human control. The term meaningful human control keeps coming in the discussion, so I'm just going to try to explain what it means. Meaningful human control basically is saying that for a system to be accepted, for it not to be prohibited, it has to have 4 components. It has to be predictable, reliable, understandable and explainable, and traceable. Any system that doesn't have one or all of these components should be prohibited. So let me start by explaining more what we mean by predictable. So a system that is predictable is basically one where when you activate the weapon system, you know more or less what is going to happen. In other words, the effects of the weapon will be in accordance with the intent of the operator. And so autonomous weapon systems, of course, are intrinsically very unpredictable, because by definition, it's a system you activate and you don't really know when or where it will apply force. So in order to make it predictable, we need to institute some regulations. For example, in the design stage, when designing the system, you need to try and limit it to only certain types of target. As I said, for example, humans shouldn't be targeted because their legal qualification is fluid. So you should limit it to targets that are by nature military objectives, things that whose status will not likely change over time. You also should make sure that the weapon is designed in a way where the duration of operation is short, and where the geographical space in which it operates is limited. You should also put limits on the scale or the number of strikes that the weapon is able to conduct. And you should make sure that humans have the ability to deactivate the weapon system or to interrupt it where necessary. There are other limits on operational context during the use. So the human user of the weapon should make sure he or she is not using the weapon in a congested area or an area where civilians are present. So they can be used, for example, on the high seas or other areas where there is less risk of unpredictable outcomes. Another component of meaningful human control is reliability. So what do we mean by reliability? It means that the weapon should be designed in a way where you're making it safe and secure. Safe and secure means that basically you're guaranteeing the proper internal functioning of the weapon so as to minimize malfunctions or errors. You should also embed the weapon with safeguards against external threats like hacking or data spoofing. And during the use stage, so as a human user, before using the weapon, you should verify that the weapon is functioning correctly. And you should also look at the impact, for example, of weather conditions. So if there's a storm or a lot of dust or sand, you need to make sure that these conditions, external conditions, will not make the weapon unreliable before using it. The other component, so the third component of meaningful human control is understandability and explainability. So what this means is if a weapon system is understandable, it means that the human user understands how the system functions and what will trigger an application of force. So basically, this means that you shouldn't incorporate in the weapon system complex data processes which are difficult to understand. For example, machine learning or self-learning, where the weapon starts to learn on its own and act on its own, kind of come up with its own methods of work. This shouldn't be acceptable. So you need to keep the weapon designed in a way that is understandable without opaque algorithms or things that human users won't be able to understand. Human users should also receive adequate training about the system before operating it. I'm going to move now to the fourth and final component of meaningful human control, which is traceability. So again, if you're going to develop an autonomous weapon system, you need to make sure that it is designed in a way that if anything goes wrong, if the weapon targets the wrong target, then there's a way of collecting evidence. So the weapon system has, for example, digital logs or auditing mechanisms that allow investigators to assess and collect relevant evidence in order to hold someone responsible. Because as Ambassador Sufi was saying, responsibility for compliance with international law lies with humans, not machines. So you can't just see the machine killing a civilian, let's say, and then blame it on the machine. A human has to be held responsible. Just to conclude this part of my presentation on Palestine's position, a combination of prohibitions and regulations are needed in order to address the serious risks posed by autonomous weapon system. And that's why we're calling for a legally binding instrument. I'm very quickly, because I realize I'm going to run out of time, I'm going to talk about Palestine's national context and also a bit of the regional dimension. So as you know, Palestine has been under Israeli occupation for 56 years. Israel has the fourth strongest military in the world and is one of the main developers of autonomous weapon systems. Palestine has historically been used as a testing ground for Israeli weaponry, including emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence in weapon systems. And it is no surprise that Israel is trying to block any effort towards a legally binding instrument on these systems. And this is dangerous for several reasons. First, the use of these weapon systems will only serve to entrench Israel's brutal occupation, which is a major source of instability and insecurity in the Middle East. These systems will make it easier for Israel to maintain its authority over Palestinian civilians by deploying robots instead of humans as a tool of control and to inflict violence against them. Palestinian civilians in the West Bank and Gaza have already started feeling the effects of Israel's increasingly autonomous capabilities. In the Al Arub refugee camp in the southern West Bank, for example, and in Hebron, Al-Khalil, so these are two images, Israel has installed crowd dispersal robotic weapons that can fire tear gas, stun grenades, and sponge-tipped bullets at Palestinians. In Gaza, it has deployed a robotic vehicle equipped with cameras and machine guns to patrol the border and help enforce the illegal blockade that Israel has imposed on the enclave since 2007. It has also installed robo-snipers designed to create automatic kill zones if any human movement is detected within 1.5 kilometers. Secondly, Israel is the 10th largest international arms exporter. As Israel exports autonomous weapon systems in the region and internationally, there is a clear risk that these weapons will change the current strategic landscape. Indeed, autonomous weapon systems will give highly militarized countries a significant military advantage in the capacity to wage warfare and amplify existing global power imbalances, further eroding international peace, stability, and security. Fourth, as more states acquire autonomous weapon systems, remoteness, so being remote from the application of force, will risks lowering the threshold against the use of force. Indeed, replacing soldiers with machines will make military action more politically acceptable at home. It will therefore make conflict easier to enter into and wars likely to spread to new areas in the region and beyond. Fifth, there is a clear risk that the technology underlying autonomous weapon systems will become available for unauthorized use and proliferate, as notably highlighted by Ambassador Sohail Mahmoud. Such systems do not require hard-to-obtain raw materials to develop and could quickly become mass-produced. We can imagine scenarios where these technologies fall in the hands of racist, fascist, or xenophobic actors, terrorists, warlords, or are programmed and used with criminal intentions to commit ethnic cleansing or genocide, for example. And unlike humans, who can at least theoretically disobey immoral orders, machines cannot. Finally, there is the risk that the development of these weapon systems will fuel an arms race in the region and beyond, as adversaries will feel the need to invest in these technologies as well. Indeed, we often hear the view that we need more autonomy in case our adversaries have more autonomy. So I will just conclude now by reiterating once again that a legally binding instrument is needed as a matter of urgency. And thank you for your attention, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Ms. Nada. Our third speaker for today's event is Mr. Usman Noor. Mr. Noor is the Government Relation Manager at Stop Killer Robots, a global coalition of more than 200 civil society organizations across more than 67 countries working towards a new international treaty on autonomous weapon system. He is based in Geneva and engages with the diplomatic community at the United Nations. He is also a human rights lawyer and practiced in London, where he served as a senior teaching fellow at the University of London. He also has a master's degree in social anthropology from the University of Oxford. Mr. Noor, you have the floor now.
Assalamu alaikum, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you all. It's a deep honor for me to be here, and thank you very much for the introduction. And it's also a homecoming for me because I am from Pakistan, so it is very much an honor for me to be here today to speak with you all. I'd like to speak, perhaps to begin with, from the campaign's perspective, why autonomous weapon systems are a problem, and then what we say the solution is. The bottom line on autonomous weapon systems is that it's machines replacing humans in the application of force. So when on the battlefield, we have a soldier or an officer that needs to make a decision over when, where, or against what force should be applied, that decision will now take place through a series of sensors and the processing of sensor data, ultimately programmed by a person in tech far removed from the battlefield. So all of the experience, the expertise, the insights, the intuition, the understanding of law, the understanding of ethics that military officers have is going to be replaced by machines. So this is a deeply uncomfortable scenario. I was speaking with one military officer recently when I was in Luxembourg, who gave me quite an interesting illustration of how important the intuition of military officers can be. And any military personnel here will probably find this will resonate with them. So the example was that the platoon, the sergeant was there with a number of officers holding a territory. And they were aware that not far away, there was some enemy forces. And so they were camped at this particular area, and they noticed a small girl of 5 years old who came sort of scouting them out. And the girl had two sheeps with her. And she was trying to pretend like she was just shepherding her sheep. But it was obvious to them that the purpose of the girl being there was to give some information back to the enemy forces. And so they were aware of this. They saw that the girl was there. She was kind of being a little bit shy, seeing where they were, seeing what kind of army materials they had, what kind of weapons they had. And indeed, an hour later, the girl had gone back to the enemy forces, and the enemy forces arrived. And this particular, they were able to deal with the confrontation. At no point in that series of events did anyone think to kill the little girl. It just wasn't considered an ethical choice. The girl is a civilian. She is not involved in hostilities. She is not to blame for whatever's happening. She is basically innocent. So it never occurred to them that they should kill the little girl. But interestingly, if that had been an autonomous weapon system in that scenario, that autonomous weapon system actually complying with existing law would have been permitted to kill the little girl. And there would have been no ethical problem from the weapons perspective, because the weapon system doesn't have ethics. As far as the weapon system concerned, is there's a spy coming and they need to protect themselves, so kill the little girl. So it's quite a good illustration of the difference between how humans think, how military people think, and how machines would behave. And it's also important for us to consider the consequences of autonomous weapon systems beyond armed conflict. Now, the conversations have been happening at the CCW, primarily been about armed conflict. But these weapon systems are going to proliferate way beyond the battlefield. We are already seeing autonomous weapon systems, for example, being used in border control. So others have spoken about in armed conflicts, there is a legal requirement to distinguish between an enemy and a civilian. It's one of the cardinal principles of international humanitarian law. And some of the arguments that take place in Geneva are that, okay, maybe we can have a system that can tell the difference between who an enemy is and who a civilian is. Of course, that's a very difficult and problematic distinction to make in any sense. But imagine in border control, being able to distinguish between a victim of human trafficking, a person who is eligible for asylum under the Refugee Convention, a person with serious mental health problems, a person coming across a border to unite with their family. These all require quite important judgments, sensitivities, understanding, and real engagement with human dignity to be able to make inquiries about why that person is there at that particular time. But if we were to use an autonomous weapon system, as we've just seen in the Gaza Strip, that basically doesn't distinguish between a child or an adult, or whether that adult has mental health problems and just automatically shoots, we are totally undermining our existing legal system. And so the campaign to stop killer robots, what we've been saying is actually a very conservative position about retaining our respect for military commanders, for their expertise, and ensuring that they are able to operate with systems and be able to exercise with their judgment, with their understanding of the dynamic battlefield, and use systems that are actually going to be predictable, understandable, explainable, as Ms. Tarbush has set out. So it's not a radical suggestion. It's actually preserving in many ways what we've already had for many thousands of years in how warfare is conducted, and what we are losing through the autonomous process. Also important to think about actors who don't want to comply with the law. You know, we're talking about compliance with the law, but what if you have, as we unfortunately do have in many countries, school shootings? What if you have a person who is going to do a massacre in a school? Currently, they would have to go in the school, perhaps with a gun or some kind of weapon, and carry out the massacre. But with an autonomous weapon system, they could potentially program that system, activate it, walk away, activate it from a distance. And that autonomous weapon system can perhaps target everyone of a certain color in a particular school, because we were able to do that with the technology we have. And then everyone with a certain shade of color is now dead in that school. So these are very serious questions that need to be addressed. There are social issues to be addressed. There are legal issues, humanitarian issues, very serious security issues. And it is why many commentators consider this to be the greatest threat to humanity at this point in time. And it is why it's so urgent for us to establish a legally binding instrument. And as others have said, Pakistan was the first country in the world to recognize that risk. And it is now the case that 90 states, and that hasn't come automatically, that has come through the influence of states like Pakistan taking leadership, turning up to the GGE. At a time when others would have considered it radical to say we need a legally binding instrument, Pakistan took leadership, had bold political vision, and it is now mainstream to say we need a legally binding instrument. What the campaign is doing, we, as Raza Saab set out in the beginning, we have organizations all over the world, some of the larger organizations, including Amnesty International, but other smaller organizations in other countries. We lobby governments. So we are engaging with governments, parliamentarians, illustrating the problem, doing briefings, engaging with the diplomatic community in the United Nations, which is primarily my task. But we also have a media wing. We obviously, everyone knows social media is critical in influencing the public at the moment. So we have a large social media presence. We also have a research and monitoring team. So we prepare reports, but we also have on our website data on where states stand on the issue. So when I say 90 states, I'm not making that up. That's on our website, and you can see for each state when they said what they said, where it is documented, footnoted. So that is part of our task to demonstrate that that momentum is there. So perhaps I can talk a little bit about the international perspective now, where things stand. So this year has been a critical year. It's been a very exciting year. Already in February, we were in Costa Rica, as Raza Saab mentioned, for an international conference. The Costa Rican government were able to host the states of all of the Latin American community and the Caribbean community. So that's 33 states. This is a region that has quite a good history in disarmament and peace. And so they were able to build on their previous positions in respect of disarmament and actually take a very progressive position on autonomous weapon systems. So they had negotiated a text and decided upon a communique which says we need an international legally binding instrument urgently. We need to ensure meaningful human control. We need to ensure that there are prohibitions and regulations. And the campaign was able to considerably support that declaration and the conference that took place there. What's been really exciting to see since then is the reverberations that that conference has had in other parts of the world. So in Europe, which is a key battleground where we need to ensure that we succeed in establishing momentum, since that conference in Costa Rica, there has been another summit, which is the Iberico-America Summit. So that is the heads of state of the Iberico region, which is Portugal, Spain, and Andorra, and the Latin American community. And they had a conference earlier this year, and they were able to basically involve Spain and Portugal into their communique and make them also agree on the urgent need to establish a legally binding instrument. So that is fantastic, because that is now European Union states that are now part of the Latin American community, and that is going to have shockwaves then in the rest of Europe. Already there are European states that are agreeing. There's Austria, there's Ireland, there's Belgium, there's Switzerland, and recently now Netherlands has joined the group of states calling for a legally binding instrument. So we are slowly prizing away each one of those states and making them agree on the need to move forward. I was in Luxembourg a couple of weeks ago for another conference on autonomous weapon systems. It was hosted by the Ministry of Defense, and they had invited the ambassadors, military personnel of that region. And Luxembourg also has now committed to a legally binding instrument. And what was very powerful, I think, from that perspective is countries like France and Germany, sort of the key military powers in Europe and the UK were also there, are perhaps now starting to feel the pinch of embarrassment for not agreeing to a legally binding instrument. So when I was there, I was saying, why is it that Europe, which claims to stand for disarmament, which claims to stand for rule of law, which claims to stand for human rights, is so far behind? And why is it that we are seeing leadership from Pakistan and Africa and Latin America? Where are you? You know, you are now behind the rest of the world. And I think this has had that was the sentiment, I think, all across the board. And it has been very interesting that since then, just 3 weeks ago, now last week, Germany and Switzerland have just circulated a new paper, which they intend to submit next week at the GGE meeting, which is a considerable advancement on their previous position. And they are hoping now to bring in the rest of the European Union. So this is how minds are changed. This is how politics, I think, is changing. And it is incredible and I think a great testament to Pakistan's leadership that the origin, the first country was Pakistan. And so perhaps I can talk a little bit about the role of Pakistan going forward. I think this is an incredible opportunity for Pakistan. We talk about the arms race, but there is a race for peace. And already Pakistan has shown its vision, and I think should be leading this race and should continue to lead this race for peace. And so there are opportunities still remaining. I'm there next week with the GGE. Our colleagues from Pakistan will be there, of course. Pakistan will continue to engage with the chairman over there. The chairman of the GGE is the ambassador of Brazil. He has recently circulated a paper containing some of the elements that he sees to be consensus within the discussions. And Pakistan, I know, is engaging there, trying to raise the level, trying to raise the bar, making sure that predictability is there, understandability. So there is a diplomatic effort going on in Geneva. And our colleagues there are excellent on that level, excellent statements that they make, and really stick up for the global South and the non-aligned movement, apart from their own country. There are other opportunities as well. The Secretary General, as Raza Saab set out, is very passionate about this issue. He is currently working on a new agenda for peace, which is going to be circulated next month. And within that, there's going to be a section dealing with autonomous weapon systems. But I think there are further opportunities to engage with the Secretary General on this issue. Some are suggesting that perhaps Secretary General can prepare a report and Pakistan could help with that process. And that is another crucial opportunity that I think Pakistan can take. But, we are here with the state of Palestine. There are many other states in this region, also states in the Middle East. The Arab group made a very powerful statement at the March GG, the first time they had made a statement in favor of a legally binding instrument. And it is incredible to see that despite, of course, tensions existing with the Middle East on this issue, there is unity. So, you know, whenever there are potential tensions between potential neighbor states in that region, they all agree that on this issue, we need to be united. So I think there is enormous potential for Pakistan to take further leadership, perhaps another conference such as what we saw in Costa Rica, potentially a space there for Pakistan to invite other states. And we would, of course, give our fullest support if that was to be an initiative taken by Pakistan. We are very proud of Pakistan in this sense. We would like to offer whatever resources, whatever support, whatever media support that we can offer, whatever lobbying support, but it is ultimately for state leadership. As civil society, you know, sometimes I feel like a cheerleader in the United Nations. I'm there saying, come on, we can do this. And sometimes it feels exhausting because I'm up against, you know, the biggest states in the world, like the US and Russia and Israel. And, you know, sometimes they won't listen to what we say, but they will, excuse me, listen to what Pakistan says. And Pakistan has enormous allies in the region. And I think there is potential for Pakistan to mobilize these allies and be an incredible force to be reckoned with. You know, for many decades, I think Europe has considered itself to be the ideas factory for disarmament. You know, we've had a long history of colonialism from Europe, where there's this sort of paternal benevolence. Ideas are coming from Europe. We have civilized the world. The tables are turning. And I think what we are now seeing, and crucially on this issue, is the normative landscape for now and future generations coming from other states. And Pakistan, I think, is played a crucial role there and should continue to play that role. And we should be civilizing the Europeans. And that is exactly what we are doing. And I don't have any embarrassment saying this. I think this is what I say to them directly, but that is the truth. When you look at the states, excuse me, that are calling for a legally binding instrument, it is not European states yet. We are winning them over, and we will, inshallah, succeed. It's a great time to be on this issue. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I look forward to further engagement on this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Noor. Our fourth speaker for today's event is Major General Osaf Ali. Joined Pakistan Army in April 1978. His illustrious career spans over 36 years of military service. He has been associated with Pakistan's strategic program at the Strategic Plans Division, SPD, for the last 19 years. He crafted, established, and also led the newly created Policy, Doctrine, and Strategy branch. His contributions to the strategic program are wide-ranging and diverse. In the operational domain, he was instrumental in the strategic threat appraisal, evolution of nuclear policy and doctrine, development strategy, conceptualization and establishment of nuclear forces, strategic weapon development. He was actively involved in weapon systems employment, force goals, and conceptualization of assured second strike capability and development of an automated command and control system for the NCA, SPD, and strategic forces. With his background of being in the pioneering team of military operations at the GHQ during Pakistan's nuclear tests in May 1998, he continues to be an advisor to the SPD since 2018. Since December 2019, he is also a member of our Center's Advisory Board. Major General Osaf Ali has been decorated with Hilal-e-Imtiaz Military and Hilal-e-Imtiaz Civil. I would now request Major General Osaf Ali to take floor for his remarks on the new arms race in the area of laws, a regional perspective. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Amna. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Ambassador Khalid Mahmood, Chairman BOG ISSI, Ambassador Suhail Mahmood, Director General ISSI, my co-panelists, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. At the outset, I would like to thank ISSI for holding this important event and on this subject, which is very important as well as contemporary and needs greater attention than what is being given currently. As you heard from the earlier speakers, the importance of this subject and the complexities involved with this subject. So without much ado, I shall straight away move on to my presentation and go through the slides as I have organized them. The last decade has seen momentous advancements in the fields of military robots and autonomous weapon systems, which are defined as you had already seen this definition, something close to this. Lethal autonomous weapons are a special class of weapon systems that uses sensors and computer algorithms to independently identify and target and employ onboard weapon system to engage and destroy the target without manual human control, even as discussions on bans and limits on these weapon systems are underway. And as we see, they assume greater autonomy and lethality. The employment of drones in the recent military conflicts between Armenia and Azerbaijan and between Russia and Ukraine have highlighted the need for greater international focus on this subject. This is the objective, and I intend covering it under these headings. Let's talk about the technologies. The emerging and future technologies are rapidly changing the nature of warfare, what has been called the third revolution in warfare. Particular advancements in some of the technologies are driving the ongoing race for development of AWS among several countries. The 2018 US defense strategy has echoed the underpinnings of the third offset strategy and highlights that the US national security will likely be affected by rapid technological advancements and changing character of war. New technologies include advanced computing, big data analytics, artificial intelligence, autonomy, robotics, directed energy, hypersonics, and biotechnology, the very technologies that ensure we will be able to fight and win the wars of the future. Among the key military technologies, artificial intelligence and machine learning have seen the widest application in the development of these lethal autonomous weapon systems. AI is the leading technology that is driving the race for advancements in the AWS. The first artificial intelligence strategy document issued by US DoD states, AI is poised to change the character of future battlefield. The DW English report uncovers how artificial intelligence is making militaries faster, smarter, and more efficient, while on the other hand, they have the potential to destabilize the world. In the last decade, the machine learning, deep learning, and neural networks have made great strides and started being utilized in a growing number of fields, in particular, the laws. While machine learning allows computer programs to automatically improve through experience, deep learning started to perform tasks that were impossible to do with the classic rule-based programming. The ChatGPT, the buzzword these days, no technology since the atomic bomb has inspired the apocalyptic imagination like artificial intelligence. Ever since the ChatGPT, that is generative pre-trained transformer by the OpenAI, began exhibiting glints of logical reasoning in November last year, the internet has been awash in doomsday scenarios. In March this year, OpenAI unveiled the fourth iteration of its GPT AI program, which has wowed users by engaging them in human-like conversation, composing songs, summarizing lengthy documents. Then there are international concerns on the GPT. In an open letter in March this year, more than 2,000 technology leaders and researchers, a group of artificial intelligence experts and industry executives have called for a 6-month pause in developing systems more powerful than OpenAI's newly launched GPT-4, citing potential risks to society because of cascading fears that they could lead to disaster for human race. Powerful AI systems should be developed only once we are confident that their effects will be positive and their risks will be manageable. This is what the letter states. The open letter was the only latest evidence of what can only be called as a widespread panic since ChatGPT appeared on the scene last fall, and major tech companies scrambled to introduce their own AI systems with so-called human computative intelligence. Just a few days ago, Geoffrey Hinton, known as the godfather of AI, is said to be leaving his role at Google and plans to warn of the risks of the technology he's long promoted. Hinton told CNBC that he now thinks digital intelligence can acquire hugely more knowledge than any individual biological agent. The global challenges. There is an arms race. As we have entered the third decade of the 21st century, the world's major military powers have begun a race to wire AI into their warfare. Laws have their application not only in the three conventional domains, the land, air, and sea, but also wide-ranging applicability in the cyber and space domains. Thus, the introduction of laws in the military and related domains would carry implications for conventional and nuclear deterrence with significant consequences for the global and regional strategic stability. It is a matter of concern that these technological advancements are taking place rapidly at a time when the rivalry among the major powers is much more fierce than it was during the Cold War period. Today, there exists no consensus on the basic premise of the global governance and international norms, while arms control and disarmament agreements are falling apart. The key pillar of the global non-proliferation regime, the NPT Review Conference RevCon 2022, ended without a consensual final document widening the structural fault lines. And in February this year, Russia suspended its participation in the New START Treaty. And as mentioned by the earlier speakers, the development and production of these machines has already triggered an arms race, and with no guardrails, the systems could proliferate to irresponsible states and non-state actors. Discussing the impact on strategic stability and the nuclear risks, very briefly, I shall explain this subject. The AWS could fundamentally change the character of war, even if there is an emergence of generational gap, as it is feared between the capabilities of some of the rival countries. And thus the military capabilities developed by the nuclear armed states and how they are postured are key determinants of whether crisis between them will remain stable or devolve into conventional armed conflict, as well as to the extent to which such conflict might escalate in intensity and scope, including to the level of nuclear use. Speedy advances in AI are causing their influences across the board with impact on strategic stability. Due to this, analysts have expressed apprehensions regarding the emergence of an AI arms race or an AI Cold War. Where are we likely to see this arms race play out first? And does it have potential to become global arms race and has been the cause with the nuclear arms? One doesn't know. If the recent advances in AWS are unlikely to completely undermine the foundation of nuclear strategy, they could have undoubtedly both positive and negative impact on the strategic stability. Notwithstanding the substantial operating benefits of autonomous weapon systems, they have increased the probability of affecting strategic stability, leading to escalation of conflict between the nuclear powers. Known for their conservativeness, the nuclear powers are unlikely to integrate these technologies in their nuclear command and control systems. However, it must be appreciated that transformative potential of autonomous systems and technologies is relevant to nuclear weapons beside integration in their logistic and support systems. Therefore, the question is, what will be the impact of adoption of such systems on nuclear doctrines and strategy? Will it bring profound transformation? Based on various studies, the short answer is no, and it remains unlikely, at least for the near future, as the major powers have indicated they are unlikely to integrate these technologies into their nuclear command and control system. But we have to wait and see how does the future turn out. There has been discussion on the limiting the autonomous weapon systems. Very briefly, I shall mention that since 2014, state parties to the CCW have held more than 9 in-depth meetings of the GGs on laws, as mentioned earlier. Amid growing international concerns, they have examined the extensive challenge raised by the systems and recognized the importance of retaining human control over the use of force. Progress towards an acceptable multilateral solution, however, has been slow, as some of the countries, as was mentioned earlier, do not support any protocol to ban or regulate the killer robots. The UN Secretary General, while referring to these machines, was very emphatic, and when he said these are politically unacceptable, morally repugnant, and should be prohibited by international law, and he cautioned that we still have the chance to ban these weapons, but the time window is narrowing. Now, I move on to the regional perspective, closer to home. First of all, let's talk about India. India has a massive UAV acquisition, development, regulation, and use program. Currently under a comprehensive policy with multiple foreign source acquisitions, local design and manufacturing involving both defense and private industry are progressing. The AWS related market is expected to reach $7.8 billion by 2025. The sale of advanced drones. After years of discussions, in June 2016, India became the 35th member of the MTCR. And taking that advantage, in May 2019, the US President approved a new policy on the export of unmanned aerial systems that allowed the US manufacturers to sell these otherwise restricted unmanned aerial systems to its allies. In July 2020, despite opposition by the US Senate Foreign Relations Committee, the Trump administration announced to unilaterally reinterpret how it would implement the MTCR, as the existing restrictions laid down by the MTCR of the 500 kgs and 500 kilometers were considered 300 kilometers a disadvantage to the US and its allies, mainly India, with the possibility of the TOT as well. After buying surveillance drones in last year, India is now close to finalizing the deal with the US for procurement of 30 Predator drones equipped with a modified version of Hellfire missile with a cost of $30 billion. The US policy to supply advanced surveillance and armed drones along with the TOT to its allies such as India will aggravate the ever-expanding conventional asymmetry between India and Pakistan, adversely impacts the strategic stability in South Asia with a growing risk of escalation. India had established a task force, which was headed by Chairman Tata's sons, and India had produced this robotic weapon, which is called Mantra, and which is India's first remotely operated tank with 3 variants. Incidentally, I would just like to mention, we were talking about Israel. Israel has Iron Dome, the typical kinetic energy, the missile defense system. Now they have developed the directed energy weapon system based missile defense system, which is called Iron Beam. What they have done is integrated both the Iron Beam and Iron Dome, that is the kinetic system, as well as the directed energy weapon system. Now, both these systems working in tandem will autonomously detect, engage, and destroy an incoming target, and simultaneously all the launchers will be capable of firing toward that target. Incidentally, the missile defense system which India has acquired from Russia, S-400, also has some sort of a capability to autonomously detect, engage, and destroy incoming targets. Now, how far India collaborates with Israel, time will tell. Indian policy on laws. Their ambassador gave a statement in GG, but as mentioned earlier, at the GG Geneva, India joined those countries that do not support any protocol to ban, to regulate these killer robots. India is likely to continue voicing qualified support for an international regime to regulate law while not giving up on developing and exporting the technology of killer robots. Pakistan. In 2012 and 13, the induction of 2 UAVs were inducted, one Buraq and the other Shapar, in Pakistan Army and Pakistan Air Force. And in 2013 to 2015, the demonstration was given. An armed UAV named Buraq successfully fired a laser-guided missile Burq, which hit its target with pinpoint accuracy. And this the Shapar 2, another weapon capable UAV, was displaced at the edX 2021 arms show. And within the armed forces, different categories of UAVs are under development by the state organizations. Talking about AI, this institution has been established at NUST and with several other universities, including PF and HEC, and as well as the SPD have established AI centers, which are functioning and developing the AI applications. However, more focus is needed because of the importance of this subject. The policy on laws. Ambassador Khalil Hashmi, we saw him and he's in Geneva. The statements which were given were generally on developing a normative and operational framework in the ambit of a legally binding instrument. The last statement is important, which was given last year. These laws must be addressed comprehensively and in all aspects. The humanitarian, legal, ethical, and security dimensions on the development of use of laws should be integrated more meaningfully and precisely into the present and future work of the GGE. Pakistan's policy on laws should continue to be governed by its national security considerations that also ensure its current and future military needs. Ambassador Sohail Mahmood, who sits here, the DG ISI now, he made a statement in Geneva that we are also witnessing a race to develop and deploy new technologies and weapon systems, militarizing the outer and cyberspace. Military applications of AI and quantum computing are leading to more lethal methods and tools of modern warfare, and lack of seriousness on part of the leading technology holders to control and regulate military use of the new technologies will likely enhance reliance on nuclear deterrence. I shall briefly cover the India-Pakistan strategic context and just to summarize, because of the paucity of time, I will only enunciate Pakistan's response. Due to the growing Indian conventional and nuclear threat, in order to maintain strategic stability, Pakistan is constrained to sustain balanced conventional forces as well as credible nuclear capabilities without getting into an open-ended arms race with India. Nonetheless, to counter the threat posed by the evolving Indian conventional and nuclear doctrines and future force posture, in particular the non-contact warfare doctrine, along with the raising of integrated rocket force, besides development, induction, and integration of autonomous weapon systems and other emerging technologies in its military and weapon systems and adoption of counterforce nuclear doctrine, Pakistan is required to put in place a comprehensive response at the political as well as military level so as to effectively address the entire threat spectrum. Toward this end, there is a need for acquisition and development of the important emerging and future technologies. And this next slide shows the list of some of the technologies. I have listed about around 20 plus technologies, which we categorize them in emerging or future technologies, which Pakistan must imbibe. And these two slides, this shows these slides. This is a long list. Obviously, the development will take place in line with the operational needs and the funding available to the development agencies. Coinciding with the fourth industrial revolution, these technologies are set to introduce a technological revolution. Therefore, it is important for Pakistan to imbibe these technologies. Coming to the last part of my presentation, that the measures to address these risks. The latest AI, known as generative pre-trained transformers, promises to utterly transform the geopolitics of war and deterrence. It will do so in ways that are not necessarily comforting and even turn existential. While AWS are still in their early development stages, it is worth the time of policymakers to carefully consider whether the putative operational advantages of AWS are worth potential risks of instability and escalation they may raise. Policymakers would do well to consider now whether the potential risks are worth the hope for operational advantages. In order to address the destabilizing perspective of incorporation of autonomous systems in nuclear weapons and systems, there is a need for all the nuclear weapon states to take due cognizance of the criticality of this matter. There is also a need for initiating a dialogue at bilateral and multilateral forums to address this issue, besides the talks at CCW. The level of autonomy, sophistication, and scope in the laws currently in use by India and Pakistan has still not reached at a stage which may lead to an armed conflict between the two nuclear neighbors. However, the absence of conventional and nuclear CBMs between India and Pakistan will be compounded by the introduction of AI into the military systems in future, which is likely to aggravate the already prevailing instability. Therefore, there is a dire need for India and Pakistan to bilaterally work out the risk reduction measures. Toward this end, beside the resumption of the dialogue between India and Pakistan on conventional forces and nuclear-related CBMs, there is an immediate need to work out bilaterally the CBMs on laws, including an agreement of mechanisms for sharing of information, use of hotlines, measures to reduce risks, regular talks, etc., so as to address these potential risks. To conclude, I would just say that the fiercely growing global and regional composition among key military powers in the development of laws is driven by the induction of emerging technologies and poses significant threat to the strategic stability. Furthermore, the application of autonomous systems and related technologies in military systems by the nuclear armed states also have noteworthy implications. Hence, the need for a UN-mandated treaty to regulate the development and use of laws is urgently required. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our last speaker for today's event is Mr. Ehsan Nabil. Mr. Nabil is an officer of the Foreign Service of Pakistan and currently serving as Director for Arms Control, Disarmament and Science Diplomacy in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He has served in Pakistan's mission to United Nations and other permanent organizations in Geneva, Pakistan's embassy in China, and Pakistan's embassy to the United States of America. In the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, besides the Arms Control Division, Mr. Nabil has served in various capacities in the United Nations Division, Americas Division, and Europe Division. I would now request Mr. Ehsan Nabil to take floor for his remarks on Pakistan's position on proposal for an international legal instrument on laws. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Amna, for the generous intro. Honorable Chairman, Director General, ISSI, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I would like to start by thanking the ISSI and SPADO for arranging the seminar. The August speakers before me, they have already elaborated in detail on the various contours and aspects of the debate around this issue of laws, which is very critical and important. So I will basically restrict my comments on Pakistan's position, which is also elaborated in the recent working paper that we have introduced in Geneva. Pakistan recognizes the importance of this critical issue, which is fast evolving. We are committed to engaging in and invigorating the global dialogue on laws. Since the last one decade, Pakistan has been expressing multiple concerns with laws, finding that they will violate international humanitarian and human rights laws, as well as lower the threshold for going to war and create security risks. Pakistan has actively participated in all meetings of the CCW and its ensuing deliberations on laws. It was under Pakistan's presidency of the 5th RevCon of CCW in 2016 that the GGE on laws was agreed to be established. You've already heard about the working paper that Pakistan has introduced. It's titled Proposal for an International Legal Instrument on Lethal Autonomous Weapons System. I will try to elaborate a bit on the proposal. It is basically divided into 8 sections and subsections. It starts with outlining the context encompassing the last 10 years of the CCW debate on various facets of laws, their devastating impacts and destabilizing effects. It underscores the emergence of a reasonable level of understanding and varying degree of convergence of the high contracting parties over the technical, legal, and ethical dimensions of these weapon systems. After establishing that there is a clear case for developing an international legal instrument envisaging prohibitions and regulations on the development, deployment, and use of laws, the working paper outlines the mandate of the GGE, which includes inter alia to work upon options related to normative and operational framework on emerging technologies in the areas of laws. In the next part, the working paper deliberates upon various challenges and dangers posed by laws, including outlining its special capability category and not just a mere weapon system. The force multiplier nature of the laws, the data bias and unpredictability compounded by growing autonomy, machine learning, and algorithms. It also points out the impact of laws on asymmetric means of warfare, anonymous and clandestine operations, and the possible subsequent reprisals. Importantly, this section underscores that the military and security dimensions of laws are both relevant and essential to the GGE's work. The fourth component of the working paper stresses CCW's role in addressing the challenges, risks, and dangers posed by laws. It outlines categorically that the GGE's outcomes must explicitly outlaw those weapon systems related to emerging technologies in the areas of laws which are non-compliant with the international humanitarian law principles and rules. Further, for weapon systems which are not prohibited, adequate rules must be evolved in conformity with the IHL as well as imperatives of security and stability at all levels. Analyzing the options for normative and operational framework on laws, the fifth section mentions that even as consensus is yet to be reached on the level of prohibitions and regulations at this stage, the GGE's primary purpose should be geared towards developing internationally agreed legal norms and their codification to plug the existing gaps. It underscores that national regulations and responses alone, such as the national weapons reviews, are useful, but not sufficient. The national measures related to laws will also lack harmonization and consistency of their application by all states. Nor can questions surrounding compliance with IHL and possible further codification of IHL in response to development and use of these weapon systems left to the sole prerogative of national authorities. Compliance and verification provisions are key ingredients for developing international legally binding rules. The non-legally binding options, including TCBMs, the transparency and confidence building measures, they do find their meaning, context, and purpose in the backdrop of internationally agreed binding rules, which such non-binding measures complement, but they cannot replace. The sixth section, it presents the main proposal for an internationally legally binding instrument laws. It is divided into the prohibitions component and the restrictions and regulations component. The proposal envisions prohibitions on development, deployment, and use in all circumstances of an autonomous weapon system in 6 categories. The first one is where the autonomous weapon system takes decisions on the use of force without human control over the decision to use force. The second is where it cannot distinguish between civilian population, combatants, or indiscriminately target civilian objects. Or it thirdly causes unnecessary suffering or superfluous injuries. Fourthly, the AWS is not able to take all feasible precautions to protect civilians and civilian objects during an attack. Fifthly, it causes incidental harm to civilians and civilian objects that exceeds the direct military advantage anticipated. And the last one is if it has effects which cannot be adequately predicted, understood, and explained. Next, moving on to the restrictions and regulations component in relation to the development, deployment, and use. The proposal highlights that weapons with human control over the decision to use force shall not be able to change their situation of use without explicit approval by a human, and not be able to change their targeting parameters without explicit approval by a human. Other restrictions that would also be required include limiting targeting capability to only objects which are military objectives by nature, on the scope and scale of use, including temporal and spatial limits, transparency, reliability, and predictability in the identification and selection of potential targets. Limitations on situations where civilians and civilian objects are not present, and being interruptible during all stages by a human. In terms of accountability and state responsibility, the next section of the working paper mentions that humans remain accountable for consequences of using lethal autonomous weapon system in line with the responsibility of states for internationally wrongful acts. The states would therefore also be required to evolve effective oversight and redressal mechanisms. In the last section, the paper concludes that the GGE must be enabled to develop a meaningful normative framework that responds to all challenges and concerns related to laws. Failure to do so would not only entail dire human consequences, but also oblige states to defend themselves with the capabilities at their disposal vis-a-vis their perceived adversaries. This concludes the discourse on the components of the working paper by Pakistan, and you do see many complementarities between the proposal by Pakistan and the one made by Palestine. But this is a much broader debate, and if I try to conclude, it would be on basically 3 points. First would be that Pakistan remains committed to finding solutions to concerns on laws. We will continue to pursue our proposal at the GGE, including at the meeting next week. Secondly, this is a work in progress. Consensus remains elusive, but we are working against the fast-moving technological clock. Complacency would not be an option. Thirdly, and lastly, Pakistan believes that failure to evolve legal norms would have the undesirable but likely consequence of a spiraling arms race, weakening of the already stressed arms control architecture, and lead to a more precarious regional and international security environment. I thank you with that, sir.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, the floor is now open for question and answer session. I would request all the participants to please introduce yourself first and keep your questions short to accommodate more questions. The session will be moderated by the Director General ISSI, Ambassador Suhail Mahmood. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Amna. I'm sure all the participants would agree that we have had an excellent set of presentations, which have been very educative and very enlightening about a very critical subject, which is increasingly acquiring and very legitimately acquiring a public profile. And I think that sets the stage for an absorbing Q&A session, but unfortunately we would not have much time, so everybody might not get the opportunity, but we'll see that this can continue over lunch as well. So first, we'll give the floor to Ambassador Arif Ayub Saab, please. Go ahead.
Thank you, Suhail. First time I'm looking at this subject, so thanks for providing the background papers. My immediate reaction is that why are we getting involved in this and taking the lead? Because you have the UN world and then you have the real world. And we know how the UN works with Kashmir and Palestine as the examples, and recently Iraq and Ukraine. So since civilization began, war has been the norm and peace has just been the interlude. And the key to winning wars has been technological development. And look at what your working paper says under dangers, para 4 and 5. Laws will propel asymmetric methods and force multiplication and mitigate the military advantage of adversaries. How is that a danger? That goes in our favor. That is the basis of our defense policy. The reason why we don't accept the Convention on Mines, the reason we did not join the ICC, and the reason we have nukes, of course. And the only convention so far which has unanimity almost is the Chemical Weapons Convention, and except for Egypt and Syria to balance Israel's nukes. But otherwise, the realist school has always dominated. And the basic flaw in the UN theory behind this resolutions is under Article 29 of the Rev 1. It says that laws should be governed by complex human judgment and sensitive decision-making processes. That is the worst definition of the human mind I've ever seen. The normal human mind functions as Einstein said, that cavemen with nukes. That is the reality, and that is what we have to deal with. And if you're using it just as an excuse to look good like we did with the nuclear weapons free zone, while developing our missile and nuclear capability. That's okay. I don't have a problem with that. Otherwise, my problem is that why are we taking the idealist side instead of the realist side on this issue? Thank you.
Would you also identify to whom your question is addressed
to you.
among the panelists?
It's to Sohail.
Well, first of all, on behalf of the ISSI, I would say we have a disclaimer. We are providing a platform for holding this very important subject. Second, I think you've heard from various presentations that this issue raises some profound legal, ethical, security, and other questions. And from my personal perspective also, I think it's good that Pakistan has taken the lead in each previous instance, whether it was chemical weapons or even nuclear, shows Pakistan's position evolved over a period of time, but we started from opposing those things also. And in the nuclear case, particularly, our development, the development of our program was directly linked to India. But we have on the panel, we have both people who are on the ground activists promoting this cause, and then we have the Ministry of Foreign Affairs representative also. So first I'll ask Nabil to say something, and then if somebody also wishes to chip in, we would. But I would request all those who intend to ask questions or make comments to please be precise so that maximum people can get the opportunity. Yes, Nabil, please.
So thank you very much. So I think you've hit the nail right on the head. That is a key question. Why are we doing it? Why don't we just get into the race and just be a part of that? Four basic elements which I would like to highlight here, sir. The first one is that Pakistan has always been a believer in the multilateralism and has been a proponent of peace. This is also one of the efforts in that direction. Secondly, dialogue is key, especially when the issues are evolving. Laws is also one of those issues which is evolving at this stage. And we believe that dialogues between all the nations of the world is important. And that's why we are taking this initiative and the lead. Thirdly, Pakistan supports global disarmament efforts all along, not just in one field, but across the domain. Right from SSOD1, we have seen what Pakistan's stance has been. Now, having said that, does not mean that we do not support the undiminished security and sovereignty of all states. That is embedded in the basic principles of disarmament as we see it. And sir, lastly, besides international, there are also regional dimensions which Honorable General Saab has already mentioned about. In the regional context also, you remember Pakistan's proposal on the strategic restraint regime. That had been there. We have been trying to further enhance it also. That is also an indication that Pakistan wants to take those measures which in future can jeopardize the regional peace and security. So these are, in my view, some of the reasons which have contributed to us taking this initiative here, sir. Thank you.
Of course, I can't speak on behalf of the Pakistani government. I think that was a very good response, but perhaps just on behalf of the campaign, you know, this is quite a common question that we get, and I perhaps just can address that by making 2 points. Firstly, the interest of having a legally binding instrument on autonomous weapon systems does not create a military disadvantage. If you are listening to the criteria of meaningful human control, it is in the interests, I think, of having predictability, understandability, reliability, explainability. You know, the people who are designing these weapon systems, what we are saying is they need to make sure that when the military commander uses that weapon system, they know what's going to happen when they deploy it. It's to the disadvantage of a military commander for them to not be able to predict what's going to happen when it's activated. It could attack themselves. If you want to be sure that when that system is activated, that it's going to attack the person that you think it's going to, you want it to be predictable. So all we are saying is maintaining quite conservative principles about, you know, what warfare should be and how to succeed in warfare to make sure that you have control. So it is not necessarily disadvantageous to have a treaty prohibiting systems that cannot be used with meaningful human control. Second thing is that if there is an asymmetry created, it would be a very short-term asymmetry. So we're looking at Israel for example. They are the #1 leader in autonomous weapon systems, and as Ms. Tarbush pointed out, there's an asymmetry, a very strong asymmetry between Israel and Palestine on this, and it's going to be compounded by this. But it is very short-term because unlike nuclear weapons, these are going to proliferate. You know, it's not the case that you need great state infrastructure to have an autonomous weapon system. Once it's available to the states, it's going to be available to non-state actors, it will be available to individuals. And so that asymmetry is going to be short-term and is going to create radical problems for everyone at a grassroots level, at a national level, at a regional level, at an international level. So I think from a security perspective, it is very much in Pakistan's interests to have a treaty at this point. I mean, I could go on, but perhaps we're short on time, but it'd be great to talk more about that issue because I think it's a very important question.
General Saab.
Sir, exactly what you have highlighted, we all agree with that perspective. But in addition to what SN Nabil has said, I want to add one more thing. As we saw in our nuclear weapons pursuit, there is an issue of moral authority. When you get engaged with the international community and when you tell them that these are weapons of mass destruction, and when all these years from SOD onwards till 1974, and then it came to 1998, and overt nuclear capability was demonstrated and displayed when India did it. So there is an issue of moral authority because you tried your best that there should be nuclear-free South Asia. But it did not happen. So now you have developed nuclear capability and you want to possess, you have a right to possess and deploy and use this nuclear capability. So my submission is that while remaining engaged with the international community for a noble cause, for a humanitarian cause, fine. But at the same time, one must not lose sight of it, as also built into the Pakistan's position at the GGE, that security consideration is also important. So develop this capability in line with the technical developments which are taking place. Retain the moral authority. So when you want to use it, you have a moral authority to use these weapons.
My name is Faiz Amir and I'm a former Vice Chancellor of Air University. My question is to Mr. Usman Noor and Mr. Bilal Sufi. I find similarities between your campaign on laws as far as anti-personnel part of it is concerned with the Anti-Personnel Landmines Act that was reached in 1998, probably right 25 years ago. There are a lot of similarities in attributes of both the weapon systems. The anti-personnel landmines, also including cluster bombs that delivered the landmines from the air. So my question is, would you consider working with the Ottawa Treaty of 1998 and include the definition of the laws in that treaty so that it becomes more comprehensive?
Yes, I mean, it's an excellent question. Indeed, the people who founded our campaign were the people who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1997 for the Landmines Treaty, Jody Williams and the campaign. They are the people who actually founded the campaign, and there's a very powerful link between these two issues. The treaty dealing with landmines basically provided quite a precise definition of what a landmine was. Basically, a system that was specific to a particular location. It had a technological description of what a landmine was. I think we are now dealing with the landmine problem, but in an infinitely vast scenario. But the basic problem is the same. You've got a very rudimentary calculation in the case of a landmine of weight equals greater than X, therefore use force, kill whoever's standing on the landmine. And that created huge problems because children would step on the landmine many years after the landmine was originally intended to be used. People were becoming disabled, and the global outrage around that was quite severe, and that's probably why the Landmine Treaty succeeded. In the case of autonomous weapon systems, we don't have that widespread amount of victims at this point to be able to point to say that this is what we have. But what we are seeing is the clear technological capacity for that to happen, but we are now concerned with a much broader understanding of autonomy than what was the case for landmines. It's basically the landmine scenario, but it could be in a tank, it could be in an airplane, it could be a sentry gun, it could be a sniper rifle, as one of the examples was. could be a drone. In fact, drones are the most common scenario we're seeing at the moment. So I think this is much broader than the landmine treaty, and it is going to have significant social impacts because unlike landmines, we could be seeing autonomous weapon systems in policing, in border control, and it could even be used by non-state actors in nefarious ways. So I think we're creating a treaty that will probably change the whole world and society in relation to how we use force. So we need something broader.
Thank you, Usman. Amir Bilal Sufi sir, would you like to add?
Just a quick thing. Thank you very much for bringing this to the attention. As you rightly pointed out, this is one of the treaties that can be made use of by the core group which is working on this proposal. And I would also like to point out that the government to government framework is a broad framework. So if you create a treaty which has an obligation only on the states to regulate its private sector, which is involved in manufacturing, licensing, and developing or patenting these programs, that is not likely to succeed. There should be a regulatory framework inherent in the text of the treaty which forces the private sector to be regulated. The comparable example is the Chemical Weapons Convention versus the NPT. NPT is about 12, 13, 14 provisions treaty, 2-3 pager, no operational mechanism, just substantive framework. But compare this with Chemical Weapons Convention. It has a very robust implementing arm. It has an international organization which has been created. It regulates the private sector chemical import exports. It forces the creation of several operational forms that have to be signed by various chemical importing associations. And there has to be a regulator within the state, such as the Chemical Weapons Convention Authority, and then pursuant to that, rules which are applicable to the private sector. So if I were to have my way, I would want to see the treaty coming out on those frameworks where it forces the states to create a regulatory framework, and then it regulates the private sector as well. That is why I reiterate that it should be G2G and G2B and B2B regulatory framework as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question we have Dr. Adil Sultan.
So thank you very much. Thank you for this discussion. It's very close to our heart, and we do lots of work at the Air University from a social science perspective and also from the technical perspective, because we have these departments of artificial intelligence and these things. All weapons are unethical, immoral, including nuclear weapons, but still states continue to develop these weapons. So this leads us to this debate about deterrence optimist and deterrence pessimist. Both have their arguments in favor and against. And I think we have lots of lessons to learn from these debates that we have had for the last 70 years about the NPT, and the most recent about the treaty to ban nuclear weapons, because it was also NGO-led initiative that culminated into a legally binding treaty from the UN platform, the first ever treaty from the UN platform to ban treaty. But again, states which never wants to disarm, they're outside the treaty. So irrespective, you can have 180 states part of this treaty, but the states that have this technology and are not willing to join that, you will not be able to implement this. The ban treaty is one example. 95 states have endorsed, but all the nuclear weapon states are outside this treaty. Likewise, the states that you mentioned are opposing. These are technologically advanced countries, and they will never agree to this thing. Israel, India, US, Russia, and China, and maybe some other countries. So you have a big task, but in the end, as human beings, we should follow what is good for the humanity, and we should continue to advocate. So I fully support, endorse. But once you talk about bringing out any new initiative, I think we have to be realistic also, because if you get idealistic, in the end, the frustration is more than the achievements. About the laws, I also got educated about, but there's a common misperception that once we talk about lethal autonomous weapon systems, there would be robots like the Hollywood movies. It's not that. So it's the AI-enabled any equipment. That could be your laptop in the future. That could be your mobile on the future. You could use anything by using that artificial intelligence. So is it stoppable? Probably not, because not only state actors are involved, there are several non-state actors they are involved into this. So if you have a convention or a treaty for the future, you can have regulations how to implement that. United Nations Security Council Resolution 1540 is one example of doing that, how to hold states responsible for the acts of non-state actors. But I think these are the challenges that we must seriously ponder about without going very idealistic. And once we talk about, this was interesting what General Saab mentioned about this letter from Jeffrey Hinton. I recall Einstein's letter also. So Einstein wrote to Roosevelt that we must build a nuclear weapon. But once nuclear weapons were built, and he said it was the biggest mistake of my lifetime. We shouldn't have built this weapon. So there would always be people advocating these kind of destructive technologies. And this is what the nature of humankind is. Now, one comment about the command and control. As nuclear weapon states, I think we need to be very clear. Yes, nobody is talking about subletting a decision-making to robots, but we have in the past history, Soviet nuclear command and control had perimeter control that we saw, that in case everybody is destroyed, all weapons are destroyed, the computers based on sensors would give those commands and the Soviet arsenal would be launched against United States. We have been there 50 years before. So it is not something new that AI will not be used in nuclear command and control. Yes, how to regulate? Can we bring nuclear weapon states on one page? Probably not, because nobody will show or declare what they are doing. AI is still being used for assessment analysis, for scenario building. I think that's also part of command and control. So in nutshell, AI has both offensive uses also and defensive uses also. So instead of just saying that AI generated robots or automated system are bad, I think we need to develop a better understanding that this is going to be part of our lives in military and civil also, how to better regulate that. I think then only you will come up with better solutions which are workable and realistic. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for very valuable comments. There was no question. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I got a chance at last. But having heard all the speakers, I think there's not much left for me to say. But I'll just say a few words. There is a tyranny of procedures for all international law. And this is also embroiled in the same thing. And no matter what you do, even when you sign or let's say made the wonderful treaty that you call anti-LASWS, it will never be enforceable. It just cannot be enforceable. It is not possible. And even if it is, there will always be some states who will prefer to stay outside this, like the International Criminal Court. Can you take the USA to court for what it did in Iraq or Israel to what they're doing in Palestine? No. So one has to accept the fact that this is there, AI is there, in computing systems, algorithms are going to be enhanced. They would affect our lives in good ways as well as bad ways. Now, war is a bad way, fine. But on the other hand, what I'd like to say is that if you really want to have, as the General Saab said, you really want to have protection or defense against such systems, is not by banning them, is by having the same countervailing activities, capabilities yourself. This is what happened with our nuclear weapons. And I'll give you an example, please permit me just to take a few seconds. In the mid-80s, after the Israelis attacked Osirak, the reactor Tuwaitha in Iraq, their F-16s landed in India. And the idea was to attack some Pakistani nuclear installations, and our army people, the top brass, called the American ambassador and told them, tell the Indians and the Israelis that if something happens in Pakistan, 3 Indian cities are gone in the next 20 minutes. Everybody was surprised. You have nuclear weapons? We had them. We never talked about it. So having the capability is extremely important. The result was that within 24 hours, Israeli planes left. Also, if you talk about controlling AI, how do you control the use of AI for medical purposes, for medical diagnostics, a whole series? So there will always be good and bad aspects of a particular technology. Only way to avoid this in war, unwanted use, is by having your own capability. Lastly, I'll just say nuclear-free South Asia we talked about, but then what is happening, what is more dangerous nowadays is cyber attacks. The attacks on the nuclear facilities in Iran, the fire that recently happened in a facility in Iran, nuclear, again through Israel. So all this will happen. So we have to live with it. And the only way to control it is to have the capability yourself. Now, this is the only way. Thank you.
Again, I think it was comment. Does anybody want to comment on a comment? Or should yeah, go ahead, please.
Thank you so much. I would like just to quickly comment on the 2 points which honorable participants have mentioned. We have to a bit understand the context, like as the previous speakers have already mentioned, the campaign is not against like artificial intelligence. Our main focus is that there should be meaningful human control over the use of force. And we have that code of warfare, we have the international humanitarian law. So the main question is that we are totally in favor of using artificial intelligence in the area of health, education, technology. We cannot stop that. So, but there are certain rules of engagement. There are the code of warfare, there is international humanitarian law. So our only concern is that humans should always remain in the loop. You cannot, like, there will be a big question of accountability. Who will be held accountable? For example, if machines are manufactured in a laboratory and they are deployed, whether the commander would be responsible, whether the machine itself would be responsible, whether the state that has developed that machine would be responsible. So there will be huge accountability gaps.
Disagree. The military industrial complex is so well intertwined, especially in the developed world, that you cannot hold any one part accountable and not the other.
And my second question is related to like what this previous participant mentioned, is that there is a difference between addressing the issue of landmines and cluster munitions, because landmines and cluster bombs, they were already used. The world saw the indiscriminate effects of landmines and cluster bombs in Cambodia, in Laos, in Vietnam, and in Afghanistan. And then the whole world got united, and the treaty was negotiated not inside the United Nations, but it was outside the United Nations. Like a core group of countries like New Zealand, Ireland, Norway, Canada, they came together and the treaty was negotiated. So here, it's something which is not even in existence. It is the technology of the future. So our main focus is on prevention. Like we have to prevention a new arm race in the area of laws. So there is a big difference between what we have seen in the past and what's coming up.
Thank you, Shah Sahab. Any further? Do we have a student? Yes, please go ahead.
Hello, my name is Astram, and I wanted to appreciate the effort of the forum in highlighting the dangers of the autonomous weapons. But it's also disappointing to see there was little to no mention of Pakistan and Pakistan military's use of autonomous weapons in surveillance. But my question is from Ms. Nadatara Abush. The question is, what is your stance on the use of autonomous weapons to surveillance on civilians, especially considering Israel has done that throughout the past few years and Pakistan is doing that, and it's been happening all across the world.
I think as far as first part of your comment is concerned, I think Saf sufficiently dwelt on that, but if he wishes to say, you can ask him, but please go ahead, Ms. Nada.
Thank you so much for your question. So I'll speak about the Palestinian context. Israel has some of the most advanced technologies when it comes to surveillance, and has deployed them extensively in the occupied Palestinian territory. And what this has created is very similar challenges as I have described, which is that it reduces humans to data and it leads to digital dehumanization, but also to major privacy issues. And of course, this is something that we find extremely concerning. So I didn't talk about it much during this intervention because we're focused more on armed conflict and the use of autonomous weapon systems in warfare. But that's a very good point. Thank you.
Yes, please, behind, the lady behind.
Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hamar Rahman. I work for Center for International Strategic Studies. Thank you for the excellent presentation by all the presenters. My question is directed towards Mr. Usman Noor. Since you have mentioned that the treaty would be very useful legal solution for all the discussions which we are holding for years, my question is a bit related to that. There is a group titled Uniting for Consensus for UNSC Security, United Nations Security Council reforms, and it is strongly holding its position in discussions related to the reforms in the UNSC. How you see that in coming time to discuss this laws issue and treaties and associated risks and concerns, such groups would be formed because UFC is also led by Pakistan and Italy mainly, and they are doing their very good job in raising questions and concerns related to the UNSC reforms. So your take on that whether in coming time and its effectiveness, of course, in forming a treaty or a very constructive process of laws. Thank you.
Yes, thanks very much for the question. I mean, the UN bureaucracy is vast. There are so many different departments. There's reforms going on regarding the Security Council. There's things going on at the United Nations General Assembly. And I mentioned it earlier when I was speaking, there's also a new agenda for peace that is being established. And part of that, there is a disarmament section. And I believe that Pakistan has submitted its views. Pakistan has an important role with the non-aligned movement and also within range of states, the Islamic states. And so within all of these different mechanisms, Pakistan can raise this issue. Frankly, in terms of its relevance in creating a treaty, it requires bold political leadership, ultimately. There are only a handful of ways in which a treaty can be established. Number one, which is the CCW, which is where the discussions have been taking place over the last 9-10 years. That would be in the form of a new protocol. So there's already 5 additional protocols to the CCW. This would, in theory, be a 6th additional protocol. So that's basically the way that Pakistan has been orientating itself. A lot of states have been orientating itself in that way. And one of the benefits of that is that most of the world's major powers are already part of the CCW. So you would have the US, China, Russia, others on board. A second way of doing it would be through the United Nations General Assembly. And so this has its benefits also. Actually, the United Nations General Assembly has all the states in the world part of that. The CCW only has 125. Notably, there's most of the Southeast Asian region not in the CCW. So Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, many African countries like Kenya are not part of the CCW. And as a campaign, we have been quite encouraging of efforts in the UN General Assembly because I think this is a global issue and everyone should be involved. It's got concerns for society, for ethics. And in fact, we've been quite encouraging of initiatives in the United Nations General Assembly. And the third way is what we saw with the landmines and cluster munitions, which is where you have a leading state or group of states that says, all right, enough with this UNGA or whatever other process. We are just going to create our own treaty without, if you want to come in, come in. If you don't want to go in, then don't. And that is also a potential route. And one of the benefits of that route is that often when you do that, you can create some very strong wording because you're not concerned about getting everyone on board. You have a strong treaty with fewer states. And then incrementally, often you see more and more states joining up. Now, I understand Pakistan's view. I can be quite candid, I think, if you don't mind, that I think Pakistan has said it prefers the UN mechanisms, either the CCW or the UNGA, I think. And there's obvious reasons for that, because you don't want to create a treaty where the big players are not on board. Pakistan has a legitimate security interests. It doesn't want to sign up to a treaty that its potential enemies are not or rivals are not signing up to. To do that, I mean, there's precedent. The Ottawa Treaty was Canada. There was the cluster munitions was Norway. We were, as a campaign, we can see value in that. But at the moment, we're quite keen to push the UNGA. I don't know if I'm answering your question here properly, but I mean, the point is, all of these things, they require bold political leadership right from the top. And I'm so very glad that this conference is happening because it requires that kind of vision. There are the other sort of bureaucratic methods are good at keeping the issue afloat, but in the end, it requires something like a resolution in the UNGA.
Dear participants, I know this is the absorbing nature of the subject that we have already overshot, and I am told that the lunch is also ready. So we'll take just one last question at the end of the table, and then we will have to return to Amna. Yes.
Assalamu alaikum. Brigadier General Masood Dia of Iraq in Pakistan. Thank you very much for inviting us to this very important talk. We thank for all lecture to give us so much information. Just I don't be go to so much detail about. I am the last one to have a question. My question, 2003, one of the superpowers country using weapons of the mass distractions to take Iraq. After that, Iraq didn't not possess these weapons. What is this scenario repaired with another country? My question to Mr. Hashim Ahmed about what's Iraq doing now. Iraq don't have this weapon and take it to Iraq after 20 years, what situation in Iraq after that, but now Alhamdulillah situation is very good. But Iraq what doing to nationality, using nationality law to about that Iraq didn't have chemical weapons. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brigadier General. Thank you for the question. I think it is extremely unfortunate what happened in Iraq. But if I try to draw the parallel, I think you mentioned the weapons of mass destruction. The laws, as me and other panelists have also mentioned, it's also a special capability category. And I also use the word, the force multiplier. So they are in themselves a weapons of mass destruction of the future. So there is the parallel, I think, and that is why we need to be very, very careful about these capabilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Any of the panelists wishes to add one final thought? So Visab, do you wish to say anything? Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I would just like to thank you. I think it was an extremely learning experience, and I'm glad we have some of the best panelists, including Mr. Osman Noor, and I believe that he will continue to be a good advocate for this cause in Geneva and elsewhere as well, and other people around the table. It's personally been a learning experience as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your own invaluable contribution for this cause over the last many years. I guess everybody would agree that we have had a very, very enriching and very fruitful exchange, and we all have emerged wiser about this issue in various dimensions. Obviously, understanding the practical realities as well and the constraints. But I think this tension between what is ideal and what is achievable has gone on since human history began. So on this note, I will return it to Amna and then we'll take it from there. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you so much, sir. I would now request Ambassador Khalid Mahmood, Chairman, Board of Governors, Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad, for his concluding remarks. You have the floor, sir.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The hour is late. I think lunch is also ready, so I will be rather brief. See, there is a constant technology advancement, from electric to electronic, then to computer. And now we are witnessing cutting edge technologies at an amazing speed. Lenin said,
There are decades when nothing happens. And weeks when decades happen. Now things are happening in matter of days. So indeed, this advancement in technology is mind-boggling. And we hear of artificial intelligence, blockchain, and machine learning, and so on. The speed at which things are changing, this is mind-boggling, as I said. Google has developed a quantum computer which can compute just in 3 minutes, which old computers used to take 1,000 years. This was contested by IBM, and they claim, no, this will take 2.5 days. Even that is something, which used to take 10,000 years. Now in 2.5 days, it can be computed. So coming to artificial intelligence, I think that is the buzzword these days. And President Putin has said that whoever leads in artificial intelligence will rule the world. Of course, it is a dual-use technology in civil applications, medical and engineering. This has very useful role, but integration of artificial intelligence in the weapon systems, that is the thing we were discussing today, that how this may lead to have very destabilizing impact, on the world. I don't have to tell what those laws are, but all major countries are engaged in developing these now laws. Israel is said to have developed a military robot as small as fly. So, the challenge is enormous, how to meet this situation, So I think after hearing all the input from the panelists, it's clear that we need to examine this matter very thoroughly and to see what can be done to prevent the injurious or the deleterious impact of these weapons. Of course, you cannot stop the march of this technological development, but we have to devise some means and methods by which we can constrain the abuse of this technology. And this is particularly important even in areas or regions like South Asia, which was the subject of this today's discussion, that because we have very an area which is crisis-ridden, territorial disputes, and history. So all these things require that, particularly we in Pakistan, take this issue very seriously. And I agree with those, who say that it is all very well to make effort to humanize as much as possible these laws. But I think we should also at the same time make effort to develop countervailing, capability to meet this challenge, which I'm sure is being drummed up by our neighbor. I think no one can disagree that it is important to keep humans in the loop as far as possible, because this artificial intelligence should not be allowed to completely rule out the role of human being, because once that stage is reached, then I think it will be very difficult to manage these, contestation in the world. So we are very thankful to all the panelists for giving us the benefit of their wise counsel. And I hope this will result in more educated decisions by our decision maker. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I would now request Ambassador Khalid Mahmood, Chairman, Board of Governors, Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad, to give ISSI mementos to speakers. First, I would request Major General Osaf Ali to please receive your memento.